Hi, Wendy here. Welcome to another edition of Wild and Precious Conversations. This week we're having a short interlude. I've lined up a pretty cool list of conversations for 2022, and I thought it might be a good idea to pause a bit this week and kind of get a lay of the land, figure out where we're going from here. I also decided to dip my toe into video recording this week. For a few reasons. So, for this week, a short discussion about the idea that I touched on in our Monday morning newsletter, effortlessness, and how to incorporate it into our lives, which, let's be honest, may feel pretty impossible sometimes. Last week, if you listened to the conversation last week, Marla Estes put forward the idea of the metaphor of compost to describe the uncomfortable place we are in sometimes in our lives. And sort of what we were trying to do is figure out a way to kind of lure people into this uncomfortable place that we know is necessary to sit in because that's where the growth happens. And when Marla mentioned the idea of compost, I thought, that's it. And we had discussed this in November 2020 in an episode called Movement that I did with Lisa Richardson. And we just kind of started riffing on that idea of gardening and what is that muck called that we're in sometimes. We know it's good for us, but it doesn't really feel good exactly. And I think at that time we also landed on the metaphor of compost. So Marla Estes mentioned it last time, and as she described it, it's the place where growth can happen. I don't know if you're aware of the idea of post-traumatic growth. It's a wonderful, wonderful transformational riff on the idea of post-traumatic stress, which is real. But the idea being that post-traumatic growth can happen. And we think it happens in the compost. So again, effortless. So anyway, all of that is true enough. And I've had the great good fortune this week, since writing this on Monday, I've had a lot of interesting things happen. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and now Thursday morning. Because yes, this is Thursday morning. First was a Facebook Live that a friend of mine, Julia Gilmore, produced, and I will put a link to it in the show notes, on the idea of resistance and taking action even though, in spite of, and because of maybe the resistance. I don't know, I'm riffing a little bit on what she said. And also a wonderful video that I stumbled upon by Russell Brand that he did about 2 years or maybe 3 years ago on the idea of laziness. And I think somewhere in that, the triangulation, I don't know if I'm using that word properly, but sort of the triangulation between laziness, resistance, and effortlessness. Maybe we can find a space to grow. I don't know. So as we move into 2022, yes, I do have this written down. I can say that I am definitely mired in or nestled in compost. I can almost feel the growth happening, the roots taking hold, digging in, searching desperately sometimes for nutrients. And also that tiny, tiny little shoot of growth searching toward the sun. It's really how I'm feeling almost daily right now. So, having said that, here we go. Staying with the metaphor of a young plant, mired in, nestled in compost. having watched Julia and Russell and having been taken by their thoughts, which converge with the idea that, yes, taking daily action is important, and doing those things you don't want to do is what we have to do. But then rest is important. But no, and riffing on what Russell Brand said, passing out on your couch in your week-old jammies with an empty bag of potato chips balancing on your belly is maybe not the best way to do self-care. And also, I will add, maybe it is for you in this moment. And that one's hard to say. And only we know that for each of us, there comes a point where we just know, it's time to get off the couch. It's time to dip ourselves in some freezing cold water, to sit quietly in contemplation, to take a walk in the woods, go running with our dog, whatever, moving forward with stuff. And as Russell Brand says, though, so eloquently, and quote, we're always applying moral attributes to our actions and our objects. As my counselor would say, we're using evaluative judgment. That food is good. That food is bad. Lying on the couch is bad or good. Sleeping in is bad, etc., etc., etc. Here are a few thoughts. Russell Brand talks about laziness as being a sort of, quote, and I'm kind of paraphrasing, I think, a sort of personal nihilism, a sort of, well, what's the point in doing anything anyway? And that's, I think, also what Julia was thinking about when she was talking about resistance. That movement where you begin to try to convince yourself that there is no point. The kind of why me? As Julia says, quote, what is your thing? When you look in the mirror and you say, I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm not whatever enough. Fill in the blank with your enough, not enough. And she says this force is universal. Everyone has their own personal resistance. And now I'm riffing on that a bit. A gravity, maybe, that tries to coerce you, pull you back down into that compost. Because it's warm. It's shit, but it's warm. And can sometimes feel a bit comforting. Way more comforting than when you're actually beginning to grow and look toward the sun. Russell Brand talks about his daily habits and how he has to do these certain things no matter what. Daily running with his dog, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, meditation, jumping in the freezing cold water. I guess he's a Wim Hof devotee, which is lovely. I'm not a Wim Hof devotee per se, but I do know that in 2017, I became sort of hooked on Korean spas in Los Angeles for a time. And oh my goodness, the cold plunges just did something for me. So I'm definitely in that team. What Julia calls resistance, and Russell doesn't really name as far as I could tell exactly, I actually call our inner critic. Back in 2017, when I very first dipped my toe into trying to transform some of this passion I have for mental health into something a little more substantial in my life, I actually created a course, long gone, on the idea of befriending our inner critic, embracing our inner critic. So I have a tiny bit of a different riff on this than those two do, but it's very, very similar. Because in my worldview, it's a good idea, and it takes from that Aikido philosophy, I guess, where you use the power, the strength of your adversary and you use it to sort of propel yourself forward. When we acknowledge our inner critic, when we listen to our inner critic and sort of acknowledge that it is doing its best to help us. Okay, it's not doing a very good job, but it's doing its best to help us. And then you gently but firmly let it know, thank you very much. I've heard what you're trying to say, and I'm going to incorporate some of it, but I'm in control. This is my show. I'm driving this thing. Then your inner critic gets a little bit quieter. And you have a willing partner in your inner critic. And your inner critic knows its place. It feels safe in a way. It knows its place. You're in control, not the inner critic. You're driving this car, whatever. Changing metaphors. But it's going to become quieter and more respectful over time with practice. As Russell Brand says, I think it's okay to relax. I think it's okay to rest. And as I would reply, damn straight, it's essential. Sometimes our inner critic might say something like, what do you think you're doing? You're not nearly prepared for this. Or similar in my worldview, often, who do you think you are? My inner critic's rising up right now in real time as we speak. Who do you think you are? Comes up strongly for me. Why you? Here's what I think about our inner critic. Sometimes there's a grain of truth in that. Sometimes when they're getting their loudest, they're really noticing something. They're trying their best, not very well. They're trying their best to alert you to something. And maybe you just need a nap. Maybe you need a healthy snack. Maybe you need to lie on the couch for a bit. Obviously, there's a more encouraging way to do it than what our inner critic often thinks of doing. But maybe you do need to pause for a bit. Take notice of your surroundings and then move forward, better prepared, more rested, rejuvenated. Sometimes it's not just a nap or a healthy snack that's needed. Sometimes you really do need to learn something better. Now, I still have a long way to go in this. In fact, oh man, it's still bothering me, but my inner critic helped me notice that the glare in my glasses was highly annoying. Now, you should have seen it before. I improved it a bit and re-recorded, and I'm re-recording. And I have a long way to go to learning. So what I did in this time is I told my inner critic, thank you very much. I learned what I could learn for this morning and came to a good enough place. So I really do apologize actually for the glare that's still present in my glasses, and I'm really irritated by it. It was way worse before. You can see I'm doing my best. Actually, but that's a place where my inner critic was really on fire this morning, earlier. But I knew I needed to learn something. It wasn't just a rest. It wasn't just a healthy snack. I literally actually needed to be better prepared, and then I could move forward. And I would say that sometimes, although I wish they could do a better job of speaking kindly, sometimes there's a grain of truth, and it's important to listen as yeah, thank you very much. I'll take it under advisement and move on. See there, wait, I think I got it anyway. So here's where this gets a little bit challenging. Is any of this effortless? I can tell you it becomes more effortless with practice. You likely know this yourself. I happen to be fortunate. I am in the fortunate group of people, including similar in some ways to Russell Brand, who did not have the choice. I'm trying to be more open about this part of my life as I move through the shame of it. Hell, it's been decades. But for me, the best I could do as a young person to try to cope with some pretty heinous things that happened to me was to develop some seriously disordered eating. Severely disordered for about 12 years. I had to stop. I knew I had to stop, and that stopping took a long time and resulted in huge growth. Growth for me that has never stopped. I think once you recover from something that huge, you kind of become hooked on healthy living. It's pretty cool, actually. So while recovery didn't help me become rich or beautiful or fashionable or hip, and in fact, that's why I've insisted this morning on doing my best to be presentable, as little glare as possible in the glasses, for example, but also just to show up the way I show up. Plain brown screen, just me. And this is where I'm dead serious. I didn't get rich. I didn't get beautiful. I didn't get fashionable. I didn't get hip. I got real. Yeah, I'm referring to Velveteen Rabbit real. I don't look back. And it's continuing to make me real. And yes, it's getting more and more effortless as the years go by. I wouldn't trade it for anything. Life is still exhausting at times. The things that happened leading up to me beginning this project in December 2019 felt more exhausting and more difficult than I thought I was capable of dealing with. Fast forward through the last 2 years, and I can tell you there were moments where I was prostrate on the ground, crying my eyes out, not thinking I could continue. I can think of at least 3 times where that literally happened over the last year. I can also tell you that by following the very basic things that I have been practicing over the past decades, I was not only able to continue, I was able to thrive. Thrive through what life handed my family and what life continues to hand my family. And I notice that we're in this compost together. Some of us are trying to escape it because it feels yucky. And for them, things are not going to get effortless anytime soon. Others are digging their roots in, facing their resistance, taking action, and daily committing to loving this life we're in together. I'm committed to daily incremental improvement, to honing my voice, honing my offering, making sure that I am at least a tiny drop of positive in this vast sea. So thank you. Next week, we have a conversation with Julia and Russel, highly accomplished person that I dare to call friend. And we're going to be discussing the book we both read called The Dawn of Everything and why we think this book changes everything for the better. So let's do this. And thank you. Thank you for listening. And as usual, I love feedback, I love reviews, and I would love to ask you to please consider subscribing. And actually, yeah, please subscribe. Take care of yourself and at least one other person, and I'll see you next week.